Welcome to the Law Be With You podcast show. Just a reminder that we are on YouTube now as Christian Fandom Geek. If you are enjoying the show, then please, you know what to do. Like, sub, and drop a comment as well. Show some love to the show, which we are doing for you, the fans. It's part of our Star Wars celebration special. This is going to be part 2 of the Law Be With You special. Part 1, we talked about the impact of the Mandalorian TV show on Disney Plus, and we addressed the ongoing controversial sacking of Gina Carano, who played Cara Dune. Welcome back to the show, Steven Harper.
Hello.
Good to have you back on.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, last time we had you, it was a lively discussion about Forbidden Planet versus Star Wars, and you didn't pull any punches.
Yeah, I'm still having nightmares about some of these movies. Poor Zack Snyder.
I know, poor Zack Snyder.
He's still alive. He hasn't done anything crazy after hearing my critique, so it's okay.
He's still around.
All's well with the world.
Now, before we go into the main discussion, straight off the bat, we don't mess around on this show. What was your take on the Gina Carano situation? Especially, I'd go as a Star Wars fan first, and then your view as primarily a Christian who's a fan.
Okay, so I would say, could you explain that situation, briefly, so that anybody who doesn't know understands if I'm going to say anything controversial.
It is anything you say, even if you say something that's like, I don't really want to talk about this situation, it will still be controversial. It's like, what, you don't want to talk about this situation here? Whatever you say, controversial on this, and when it comes to what happened. So essentially, what happened with Gina? She played Cara Dune, who's a very popular character on the Mandalorian TV. So I think most of the listeners that are listening will know in that respect. They might not know the ins and outs fully of why she got fired, but essentially, she's tweeted out a lot of pro-conservative in terms of Republican tweets, and then she put out a tweet comparing how Republicans are treated, and she compared it to World War II and sort of Nazi propaganda, and how in Germany it was the propaganda given by the Nazis really first turned neighbours against Jewish neighbours. So before even the soldiers got involved and doing all those things which were absolutely horrendous, the propaganda in itself turned neighbourhoods against their Jewish neighbours, and kind of alluded to that in a I think it was in a tweet. I don't know if it was a tweet or was on Instagram or on both, but either way.
Yeah, I saw the tweet.
Yeah, and so it was a situation there where Lucasfilm, obviously, Kathleen Kennedy is the president of Lucasfilm. She took over when George Lucas sold his film company to Disney. Mm-hmm. She was in as the president. So whatever's happened there, she would have really kind of okayed it. Should have had to. Now, Gina is known for being outspoken, and I think the traditional fans and the conservative fans, or especially those who love Star Wars, who are very conservative in nature, very Republican, or kind of along those sort of lines, they love Gina. They see her as kind of, she's speaking a mind, free speech, a powerful woman, not being tamed by the establishment. Whereas maybe more liberal Star Wars fans, or maybe even Star Wars fans that would consider themselves to be quite woke, probably aren't sure about Gina, or maybe even didn't like her. So it's kind of an awkward situation. What made the situation even more complicated was that Pedro Pascal, who plays the Mandalorian, he's made similar sort of comments himself before that, but he's more liberal. So his ones were kind of comparing World War II to how kind of the right have behaved, and sort of alluded to it in a sort of how Donald Trump supporters sort of behave, and kind of compared it to World War II and whatnot. So they've both made comments that are kind of in the same genre, shall we say.
Okay.
But and I did speak in my previous episode. I spoke to Omar about this, and Omar is an interesting guy. He's very knowledgeable on comics and Star Wars. So the guys listening to this episode will have heard what Omar's or his opinion already on it.
Okay.
But I wanted to get your opinion on it because it's just such an interesting situation going on. Because it's not even fully resolved, really. There's talk of, will Gina return? Will Lucasfilm back down? Because Gina's popularity seems to be just more and more and more. She went on the Ben Shapiro show and she gave her view of what happened on there and things like that. So it's a really, I think it's divided fandom, but she has a lot of support. And so I guess what would your, like I say, what would your view be just as a Star Wars fan, and then as a Star Wars fan who's a Christian?
I mean, just as a movie fan, just to start as a movie fan, like, it's always dangerous for me when you change, because I'm assuming they're going to replace her character with a different actress. Because you can't write somebody into a show and then, unless they just at the beginning say she died, which is going to be terrible. Like
off screen.
No, like if they just say that like her character has somehow disappeared, and somehow I haven't seen The Mandalorian, so that's the last thing. My wife wanted to watch that, and so that's the last thing for me to watch on the list now.
You're missing out on that one. It's a fantastic show. The Mandalorian.
Yeah, and well, I think chronologically, when I watched the Star Wars series, I watched them chronologically, like how they were supposed to be in its own universe, rather than how it was released at the cinema.
Yeah.
So The Mandalorian, from what I saw, was one that specifically they told me to watch at the end, because I think I went off of a blog post that listed it all and then suggested watch The Mandalorian at the end, because you've got the whole context of the stories and the movies and what's going on in the universe. With that said, in a movie scenario, it's horrible. In a series, it's a little bit more common for characters to change their actors and actresses because of obviously things like this. But usually it's money. Usually the actor wants more money, and then I think I was watching the Hangover series, and it reminded me of the main guy who was in the first one, the one who got lost, who was up on the roof the whole time. He had the same issue with that series. He wanted more money because he saw himself as one of the bigger stars of the show, of the movie. And they refused. So if you watch the series, the trilogy, he's in it less and less because they just didn't want to pay him money to be in. They didn't want to pay him as much as he wanted. So that's why he has like this reduced role. And it happens. It happens all over the place. People's egos grow as popularity of a series or a movie grows. With all that said, when it comes back to her situation, there's a couple of big points for me. One, I'm British in America. I live in America, and the big thing that I've noticed since being here is the divide between people's political views. In Britain, while political views are often can be discussed, you don't usually you're not like identified as a person based on your political approach or viewpoint. I personally see myself more of a centralist. I believe in taking the best from both sides and being fair. When you're putting together legislation and stuff like that. So I tend to stay out of politics in general because I think it's corrupt and disgusting on both sides, quite frankly. So when it comes to her posting controversial stuff, I think that is very hypocritical to cancel someone based on the fact that there are other people on the opposite side who are doing exactly the same. They say equally as controversial stuff, just in a different way. So for me, I just think it's hypocritical, which is typical of American culture, because politics should not be as strong as they are. The amount of power that is given to politics in the States is very dangerous. To normal people, people get very and overly serious about politics in the States, and it's not something they should be that serious or overly. We should be concerned. It's legislation. It's things that are going to help or negatively impact our lives as people living in the country that we're in. So, of course, we should be looking out for it. But to pick a side, to say that you're either blue or red, donkey or elephant, I think it is here. To me, it's just stupid. What you're looking for is the best for society as a whole in a fair way. As a Christian, we're supposed to respect those laws. And this is where, as a Christian, it becomes the waters get a bit murky, because I can only speak for myself. I will have certain views that are probably seen as controversial. I'm not going to go into what those are, but I will have views that are controversial. However, if a legislation is passed that's opposed to my views, I have basically two options as a Christian. I either leave the country and go somewhere else which is aligned with my views, or I do what Jesus said and I respect the laws of the land in which I live. Even though I might not like it, my job as a Christian is to obey. That's part of my personality. It's part of who I am as a Christian. My faith in God is that I'm supposed to be following what Jesus wants us to do. And he respected the law, even though he didn't agree with it. He respected it, and he shows that in throughout his whole life, as you'll know, and I'm sure some of the listeners will know as well. When you do that, and when you have that slant on things, what you don't get is the cancel culture, because all of a sudden you're not attacking people for their views. You understand that people have differing views from your own. They're not always going to be things that you agree with. And while I think it's okay, I think it's good that she went on the Ben Shapiro show. I'm not going to lie, I watched Ben Shapiro's show quite a lot, actually. And I agree with a lot of what he talks about, because I think he comes from a very rational and logical standpoint. I'm not bothered about the politics. I'm bothered about the topics that he's talking about and dealing with.
Yeah.
So when I listen to that, I think it's good for her to go on shows with people who she understands and who agree with her, because she's explaining her perspective and her point of view. My hope would be that people would listen to her, even if they have an opposing view, and respect her for it, and stand back and be like, oh, that's okay. She's allowed that point of view. Now, if it's threatening people's lives, if she's saying she wants to kill people, that's different.
Yeah.
If she's threatening violence or instigating some kind of destructive behavior onto any group of people, then that's obviously bad. But from what I've seen, she's not doing that. What she's saying is,
I haven't come across
her perspective. Yeah. And her perspective is around politics and propaganda. Is that really something that you cancel somebody's career over? To me, that's just a stupid excuse for people who just are too cowardly to stand strong in being a normal, sensible human being. And so that's what I see with it all. I'm just like, whether you're liberal, whether you're conservative, whatever, you should not lose your job based on your extreme views, whichever way they're slanted. It doesn't make sense to me. This is a country that talks about freedom of speech, freedom of opinion and thought. And yet here we are restraining freedom of speech and actually saying you're allowed it, but you won't be allowed a career if you have it. So it's really stupid and very hypocritical, which is ingrained centrally in American culture, unfortunately. As for all the things that I love about America, the central body of its culture is very hypocritical. So for me, the whole thing shouldn't be happening. She shouldn't have been cancelled at all. At the end of the day, Twitter's one of the most toxic places in the world to go, because essentially what you've got is an app where anybody can go, anybody can say what they want. They can create anonymous accounts. One person could have like 100 accounts and say the same thing, and it looks all of a sudden like there's a large group of people who agree the same thing, when it's just one person with loads of accounts. It's the same thing with racism in football at the moment. Like, you've got these people being racist to footballers. Well, the more you attack it, the more people are going to start attacking back, because they feel like they're being oppressed. So they're going to be more racist. That's not to say we should ignore it, but what it's to say is that we need to, Twitter in this instance, need to start putting things into place that actually safeguard these footballers and people of color from being attacked by loads of anonymous, stupid people. Having what was it? The ID. They're talking about having ID as a way of signing into social media. So you have to,
Yeah.
provide actual proof of who you are. I think that's a good idea. And I know there are a lot of, see, this is where the whole conservative thing gets weird, because there will be people who say, like, that's infringing on our rights. So what? Like, that's for the benefit of society. If we all have to prove who we are when we go on social media, guess what? You're not going to get as many anonymous, random, weird psychopaths saying all these stupid things. And it goes from the extremes, like racism, which is horrible, to the cancel culture, which to me is a really shallow thing. It's just a very shallow, stupid thing that's
just kind of delete imperative, isn't it?
Taken hold of our society.
Yeah, we like, if you say something we don't like, we're going to we want you deleted out of existence. We want your career gone. We want you off every platform.
So, and then what message are you sending to people? You're telling people that you can only feel neutral about everything. If you want to be a celebrity, if you want to be somebody who's well known and respected by all, you just have to be this person who sits. You have to be the Switzerland of people, and just sit on the fence and be okay with everything, but not really against anything at all. Which to me is pathetic, and it doesn't make any sense, because any human knows you will agree with things and you will disagree with things, and that is part of our human nature. And there's nothing wrong with having a different opinion from another human being. The problem is how you go about disagreeing with that person. And if you do have extreme views, what you then go and do with those views. Because there are lots of people who have extreme views who don't go and kill people for those views. They don't hurt people for those views, but they still have them. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's their view. As long as they're not acting on it, there's actually nothing wrong with it. There's stuff that the church can do to help, which I think they're not. And we won't go into that. But for me, to the point with her, I think that she shouldn't be cancelled. She should be allowed on the show. If anything, the movie studio should simply come out with a statement saying, we don't necessarily align with what she's saying, but we do believe that people deserve the freedom of thought and freedom of thinking. And if she has opinions that are controversial, so be it. But we're not in line with what she's saying, but we're not going to fire her just because she's upset a group of people.
Yeah, we're not going to delete her. We're not going to attempt to delete her or anything like that.
I think, who was it from the Oscars? Wasn't it? It was Kevin Hart. He did the right thing when he was, I don't know if you know this, when he was told he couldn't host the Oscars, it was because he made a homophobic joke or something about 10 years prior.
Yeah.
And they wanted him to apologize, and he just said no. He said, why would I apologize for this? He said, like, I'm a comedian. My job is to, like, take the pee out of things. And I'm always going to make statements that are more controversial when I'm being funny. It doesn't mean
of course he would.
Even agrees with it. He's making those statements because he's a comedian.
Of course, you might not. Yeah, of course, you might not agree with what Kevin Hart's saying at all. But they, comedians push boundaries, don't they? That's their job.
Yeah, and it's the ridiculousness of it that makes it funny. That's the whole point. It's the extremity of it becomes funny because of who's delivering it. You know that he's not picketing against these people or anybody that he has these views against. He's
I think
just
Ellen's one of his best friends. Ellen, who's
exactly.
He's a very high-profile talk show host, celebrity personality in the States, lesbian, part of the LGBTQ.
Who also was cancelled. She had her own thing as well.
She had her own issues as well. That's right.
And that's my point. Like, whichever side of the fence you sit on any subject, you're always going to agree and disagree on stuff. And if we were to cancel everybody who has a differing opinion, then nobody would be allowed to do anything. It's this ridiculous thing that's been happening in society that we've allowed to grow. And this sort of groundswell of toxic waste within social media is just being allowed to fester. And that's on the social media companies. It's on them. Yeah, it's on their doorstep, and they're not doing anything about it. And that's the problem. They need to, I don't know if they will. I'm hoping that the racism issue in football is going to start something that, funnily enough, cancels the actual organizations who allow this stupidity I guess that's the irony, is that people are trying to now cancel the social media channels and platforms for for allowing these groups to cancel and do what they do in such a toxic way. But they need to be accountable. They're making a lot of money off of our backs. So
they are.
My hope would be that they do change their policies and put things in place that just help humans understand that they have a social responsibility, not to be idiots. So,
of course,
like I said, don't cancel the poor lady. Just let her have her views. They're not hurting people. She just has views that people, they're polarizing, aren't they? Some people disagree with them. So what? Right. That's called life. So that's my view on it from like movie perspective and Christian perspective.
Thank you. Now, focusing in now on we're not going to really talk, like I said before, we're not going to talk too much about the prequels, so to speak. So we're not going to blast Jar Jar Binks or anything. We don't need to.
I couldn't understand a word he said, by the way. When I watched the movie,
we're not going to go there. We're not going to go there.
I looked at my wife and was like, "What? We're not going to put subtitles on because I don't know what's happening."
We're not going to even go there. We're not going to go there.
Okay.
Okay. Let's look first briefly. We're going to be brief at the original sequel trilogy, what we grew up on, what we call proper Star Wars. The New Hope,
right.
Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. Briefly, because I've got more questions for you, so we'll do this quickly on this one.
All right. I'll try my best.
What was the cultural impact of these films for you, and how did they, and what numbers did you give them on your film index?
Cultural. Do you know what? This is quite an easy answer. Culturally, it didn't do much for me because I never watched all three when they when I was young enough to see them. Obviously, they were out before I was alive. And then when I was old enough to watch, I remember watching one or two of them. I actually think I watched The Empire Strikes Back. I think that was the movie that I watched as a kid. That's the Star Wars that stands out. And then when I went through all of the list again, and I watched it, that was the one where I was like, I sort of vaguely remember watching this when I was younger. So that was the movie that I'd watched. So culturally, for me, it had very little impact. If anything, it was more, I don't understand why everybody makes such a big fuss about Star Wars because I hadn't seen it. So for me, it really didn't do much, although I understand in the wider society, there are obviously far bigger implications and a lot more stuff happened because of that. Positive mainly as well. I don't think there was really much negative about that series. I think after watching it now, I can definitely say that it's a decent trilogy. I don't think this is going to be controversial, but I don't think it's the best trilogy of movies ever made.
It depends on the genre you're looking at.
Yeah, there were a couple more that I personally prefer as
I think for me,
three movies.
I think for me, what kind of was it? Because obviously they're so iconic.
Yeah.
And I think The Empire Strikes Back, for me, is one of the best, probably one of the best, if not the best, science fiction, science fantasy films of all time.
Yeah.
I don't think anything touches Empire Strikes Back. I think A New Hope was great in the sense of, obviously, it's a bit before our time, but in a sense of when it first came out, it was.
Oh yeah, very much so.
It broke barriers, and it had special effects, and it had just concepts that you would not see at the cinema. Kind of the time. Really, obviously, we spoke about this before. Forbidden Planet versus Star Wars. Obviously, you had Forbidden Planet sort of pioneering in the kind of 50s, and then there was just nothing really of any sort of consequence. Yeah. And then Star Wars comes out, and Star Wars is like, whoa, and it's kind of like the ideas in terms of Forbidden Planet, as in it's breaking a barrier and it's doing a new thing in an awesome way.
Yeah,
but even more fantastic concepts are coming in as well, and we start to kind of get to the sort of heart of Star Wars, of the sort of the Jungian sort of archetypes and the hero's journey that you see, especially with Luke Skywalker and his and kind of in tandem with Obi-Wan Kenobi as his mentor. You kind of get that. I think the last film in that trilogy, The Return of the Jedi, probably falls a bit flat compared to how high Empire Strikes Back took it.
That's interesting you say that. So for episode 4, 5, and 6, A New Hope was the one that I liked the least out of the three. I actually thought that was a pretty boring movie because, and I get it. Essentially, it was trying to set up the story. And
of course, yeah.
I think that if you were instantly a fan of the sci-fi genre, I'm sort of hit and miss. There are certain movies that I love in sci-fi. There are others that it really makes me want to vomit because of how bad it is. But this one really struggled because I felt like it was really slow paced because it struggled to get into the story. And I'm not going to blame that on anything necessarily bad. It was just that it was the first of the trilogy. So it was trying to establish a story. That can be difficult. And I understand that.
There's a lot of heavy lifting, doesn't it, if it's a first film?
Exactly. They're having to build characters. They're having to try and build your loyalty as a viewer to those characters. So they're having to explain a lot more and do a lot more that is just slower storytelling, unfortunately. The Empire Strikes Back it's number 14 on my list of movies of all time. So that's the polar opposite in many senses. I gave episode 4 8.4 out of 10, which probably doesn't sound too bad, but on my movie list of like 500 movies that I've got, 8.4 is actually towards the bottom end. Whereas Empire Strikes Back, I gave 9.5. The highest movie I've got is a 9.8. That's my number one movie on my list. So you can see that I really enjoyed The Empire Strikes Back. I actually gave episode 6 a 9.3 because I really enjoyed it. Certainly not as much as The Empire Strikes Back, but I really enjoyed it.
You liked Return of the Jedi?
Yeah, it concluded that story arc brilliantly. I think it did everything it needed to do, and I think it did it incredibly. I think it did it incredibly well. I don't give anything over 9 to me is a movie that I would want to watch again. So out of all of the Star Wars movies, there are 3 that I would watch again, and 2 of them are The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So I personally really enjoyed those 2. And I just remember I came into this not ever watching any Star Wars movie that I could remember properly. And so I watched them all. Me and my wife sat and watched every one over the period of about a week. Each night we'd watch 2 or 3 movies, and I was rating them as I went through. So I really looked at it from a non-fan point of view. I was just coming in as like a film critique and just saying, do I like these movies compared to, all the other movies I've got? So I really love them. Episodes 5 and 6 in particular, they're my 2 favorite Star Wars movies. So to say, I mean, maybe I sound biased now, but I just really enjoyed it. I thought that while the graphics and the CGI obviously wasn't up to scratch to today's standards, for the time it was groundbreaking. And I'm somebody who loves realism. When it's CGI, I hate it when it goes overboard and it looks fake. I don't mind if it looks fake because of restraints on technology, like in the Star Wars movies. Like some of it doesn't look great because of the fact that technology wasn't advanced enough to make it look good enough, and that's okay. I can let that go, because what they did, they tried to balance the two. They used real actors in real sets. They built a lot of those sets inside the ships themselves. There weren't too many like green screen scenarios where you were like, this is awful. And when there was, it didn't look bad at all. Obviously, Luke losing his hand, like that could have looked really bad, but it didn't. It actually looked, I mean, it's an iconic moment that most people will never forget from the movie. So that goes to say a lot about how well they actually managed to balance technology.
And obviously the Luke part with his confrontation with, with Vader and the greatest film revelation of all time. Is is such a cultural. I mean, how many times has that been parodied? How many times has that been kind of spoken about? Put in other, other TV shows referencing that moment.
Exactly. This is a whole cult that's come from this, and a cult. I don't mean cult in the negative sense. In this, in the way I'm saying this, I actually think it's built a great. You've got it in your name of your podcast. It's a lore, isn't it? It's developed this really cool group of fans that absolutely love the universe that they're immersed into, and it comes from those moments. Those moments are what live in your memory. Those are the moments that attach themselves to who you are. I'm assuming people relate enough that they want to go back and watch more, and they want to get more into the story, more into the characters. They even want to dress like the characters. So like, if you're into that level of immersion, clearly the movie's had a positive impact in your life to do all those things. So for me, it's a great trilogy. It's not the best movie trilogy of all time, in my opinion, but it's definitely in the top 5 at least.
Yeah.
So that was my take on the originals.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is have a little break, and then we'll be back on the Lord Be With You podcast show. Part 2, we'll be talking about the new sequel trilogy with Steven Harper. Back with you in a moment.